going to talk to you about how to communicate with veterans, as well as what some of the jargon that they use really means. And throughout the presentation, I'll give you some examples from my personal experiences as well. We'll end the day with a question and dialogue type thing. So let me invite you that if you have questions that come up, or if you have comments, go ahead and put those in the chat session. And at the end of our session, at about 15 minutes till 1, we will stop and go into addressing what it is that you put in that chat session. Nancy will keep track of that for us. As I said, I am a military chaplain as well. I've served the military for 31 years. I started off enlisted. I started off as a fuel systems mechanic on the F-16, became a chaplain's assistant, and then went to the Army as a chaplain for 5 years. And I've been an Air Force chaplain for the last 15 years. And I've served Ramstein Air Base at the 435th Casual Aeromedical Staging Facility. That's where every injured military member in the European theater would come to be transported back to either Walter Reed or one of the other hospitals back in the United States. That's where they received their first care. When I was there, we had about 5,000 airmen, soldiers, Marines, sailors that would come through every week. So it was pretty high intense. I've also served in the Middle East as a chaplain who was there during the war, and so my last deployment was about 4 years ago. I want to begin today's talk by let's look at post-traumatic stress disorder. If I can get everything to work here on my end the way it's supposed to, that will be good. Let me see if I can get this to work. There we go. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event such as a natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist attack, war, combat, or rape, or have been threatened with death or sexual violence or serious injury. This is the definition that's given by psychiatric.org, and it works well. This definition works well with what most military members experience. I want to invite you to think about this for a moment. Most every veteran that has served in the military from 1943 to 1974 and from 1992 to present day are likely to have experienced a traumatic event of war, terrorist attack, serious injury, or threat of death. These are the obvious candidates for PTSD. However, there's one element that's just now catching the attention of the leadership. And we're not sure what its full effect is yet, because we've just now begun tracking that, and that is rape and sexual assault. Although we have more data on women, we're seeing more men coming forward having experienced rape and sexual assault as well. Just from the female perspective, 25% of women in the military have experienced rape, and up to 80% have been sexual assault during their career. As of 2018, the data shows that men are reporting about 50% of what the women report in rape and sexual harassment, which means about 12% of men are reporting having experienced rape, and 40% have been sexually harassed. In 2018, there were 20,800 military members who have experienced some type of sexual violence, and that's just one issue when dealing with PTSD. Presently, the military members on active duty will have a deployment to a war zone about 1.2 times in their career, while the National Guard and Reserve, believe it or not, will actually have at least 2 deployments throughout their career. And the Air Force actually has more deployments than any other branch of service. This is important to know because not everyone that serves in the military has been deployed to a war zone. However, that does not mean that they will not experience PTSD or won't develop PTSD. Their trauma may come from the continual threat of having to go to war, being separated from their families, and or it can be from hearing the stories from those that have returned, which would be secondary PTSD. It's also important to understand that just because someone has had many deployments to a war area does not mean that they will develop PTSD. One of the challenges of PTSD is that we don't know why 2 people could be in the same place, in the same space, experiencing the exact same event, and one person will wind up with PTSD while the other doesn't. So don't assume just because a military member has been deployed to war that they have PTSD. The opposite is also true. Don't just assume that they don't have it. It's important so that's really why it's important to recognize the signs of PTSD in the veteran. I want you to watch a video. It's a short video. As some veterans explain in their words their experience of PTSD and what it feels like. This clip comes from connection.net, and it can be found on YouTube if you want to watch it later as well. So let's hear what these veterans have to say.
We all in the military a lot of times think we're the only one. We don't know that there's this big wave of veterans that have been exposed to trauma that can get help.
Some of the symptoms that I noticed immediately for me were the restlessness, not being able to sleep at night.
Just being very paranoid of loud noises, jackhammers.
I was suffering inside and shaking, sweating at night, just trying to find an answer, to feel comfortable with what my buddies and I went through.
A lot of the relationships that I had, whether they were romantic, friends, family, were all deteriorating because of my PTSD.
The things that people don't talk about are like forgetfulness, flightiness, just kind of zoning out.
Some of the feelings described were being alone, restless, paranoid, noise associations, suffering inside, shaking, sweating at night, looking for answers and comfort as they try to reconcile their experience with what they perceive to be the normalcy of life. There was the deterioration of relationships, forgetfulness, frightfulness, and zoning out. These are the signs that we attach to PTSD, but there's also depression and anxiety, and it can also be someone's personality. So it's not always PTSD. Although these are descriptors of PTSD, you can't determine if someone is struggling with PTSD by these descriptors alone. There's another critical element that I think that we always have to look at, and that's body language. So I want to take just a moment and introduce you to Skylar. Skylar's an Army veteran who's been diagnosed with PTSD. And I want to show you a clip as Skylar speaks, and I invite you to look at his body language. See what his body language tells you, including his voice.
My name's Skylar. I was in the Army, active duty, 6 years. I think the overall experience of being in a combat zone stays with you forever. I think my vehicle got blown up directly, maybe 4 times, and indirectly, handful of times. So I think there's like an anxiety that sticks with you about stuff like that. Getting out of the military, it's scary, because you have this whole life that you learned. For me, it was 6 years active duty in an infantry unit. Now I have to all of a sudden go be a civilian. I didn't have any Army buddies around, so I didn't have people that I could talk to and hang out with. And I kind of felt alienated from the civilian world because I didn't share anything in common. When I got out, I didn't think that I had PTSD, I almost thought like PTSD was something that people who couldn't handle the intensity of their job had. And when I got out, I didn't think that I had any issues or mental health issues that would affect me in the civilian life. I found that I was having trouble controlling my emotions sometimes, my anger, my frustrations. It was easier for me to get frustrated. And when I did get frustrated, I took it more seriously, as if something serious was going on. If I was running late to a movie, I felt like I was running late to a mission and people's lives were at stake. But that wasn't the reality. That personality characteristic, that intensity, that drive makes you succeed in the military, but it doesn't in the civilian world. It alienates you. And I had to back off and let that go. And that was hard. It took a lot of other people coming up to me and telling me, hey, I think you have PTSD, or hey, I think that you have things going on that you need to talk about or you need help with. I say, no, I don't think I have PTSD. What could I have PTSD from? And I was always thinking there has to be some specific event. I don't have a constant nightmare where I wake up and I'm reliving a specific situation. I'm not constantly bunkered down in my house behind sandbags, waiting for the invading army to attack. No, I don't have any of those things going on, but there is something kind of wrong. I do have this agitation, this anxiety, this hypervigilance from time to time. Maybe something's not right. So I went down to the VA and they asked me, they said, have you ever been blown up before? Or have you ever been exposed to a blast? And I said, yeah, quite a few times. And they were like, how many? And I told them, and they were like, wow, well, you probably have traumatic brain injury. They helped with my memory and concentration issues and how to regulate my mood and stuff like that. And that was a really productive experience because at one point I felt hopeless. I felt like I'm on the road to not recovering. I'm on the road, I'm on a downward spiral into some abyss of like, mental disability.
Did you notice Skylar's voice? It appears tense and on the edge. It wasn't an easy, relaxed conversation as he appeared to be a little bit restless. Did you notice the stare that he would get when he talked about his time in the military? It was as though he was going right back to that moment. Then he talked about being scared to re-enter the civilian world. Isn't that interesting? Here, this person experienced many explosions, along with the threat of losing his life, and what scared him was returning to the civilian world. It was scary because he didn't feel like he had anyone to help normalize his experiences. I want to take this moment and speak to you as non-military folks. So I want to say to you, don't get upset when a military person doesn't want to talk to you or share with you their stories of combat. It's painful, it's scary at times. Most military members aren't trying to exclude you, but there are several issues at work within the mind of the veteran. One is that we've taken an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, which means that there are things that we know that we cannot share for national security reasons. And if we do so, we could risk going to jail. Most individuals join the military because they love this country and they want to protect its way of life. And so they keep these secrets to protect our citizenry, and it stays with them even after they leave the military. Secondly, we don't want to share our stories because we know that no matter how hard we try, you'll never fully understand the experience because you've never been there. It's kind of like telling the story that you and a friend are talking about, perhaps you find funny, and someone else is listening into that story, and you relay the story to them and they don't get it. And we often say, well, I guess you just had to be there. That's what the shared experience of war is like. You just had to be there. But let me stop and also say, it doesn't mean that you can't help the veteran. Absolutely you can. But I want to tell you the most important thing you do when you're helping a veteran is be honest and authentic. The veteran can smell a phony a mile away. If you try to be something you aren't, if you try to relate an experience that you never had, if you try to compare to their experience in some kind of phony way, they're going to write you off and you're never going to get another chance because you've lost all credibility. There's also the same way with each other. They know if you're spinning a tale of BS and they'll cut you out because integrity is vital. Did you hear the reasons that Skylar gave for not thinking he had PTSD? He said this, he said, I don't think that I had PTSD. I thought PTSD was something that people who can't handle their jobs got. As he was saying this, if you notice, he rubbed the back of his neck. This is a typical attitude of most military members. It's ingrained in us in basic training that no one or no thing is better than we are. We are taught that only win, so that's to use a nice word, give up or give in. We're taught you're tougher, you're better, you're stronger than anything or anyone else that's coming your way. Additionally, the military for decades have taught us that there's no place for mental weakness, and to seek mental health is a sign of weakness. And so with that idea, it's been hard for the military to make this transition back and for the veteran to make this transition to seek mental health professionals. In the past, the military member could lose his or her job if he or she sought out mental health. Today, the military values it, but it's still somewhat dicey. Depending on the job you have, if you have a mental issue, you could be put on temporary suspension of your job. Depending on what that outcome is, you could lose your security clearance. If you lose your security clearance, that means that your career is over. And that's a tough thing for most veterans. I mean, and I understand the military's perspective. They can't have someone flying a plane or launching a missile or assortment of other things if they're not confident in one's mental stability or physical reaction to some kind of mental stimulus. So military's members' instinct is to fight against any kind of mental impairment or disability. They don't want to be viewed as broken or weak. Schuyler also went on to talk about his hypervigilance and how that was so helpful in the military, but it caused him to be alienated in the civilian world. And you'll notice that as he talked about that, how it took him out, and that there was no specific event that happened to him that would make him think that he had PTSD. It was others pointed out to him. He said, I didn't have any nightmares. I wasn't jumping behind things when I heard loud noises or things of that type. But what he did experience was anxiety and hyper-vigilance. He said he felt hopeless, as though he's going down to the abyss. He never used the word suicide, but the words he used described it. So hopefully this gives you an example of what PTSD is and some of the ways that it plays out. As a chaplain, I want to touch on another point that we didn't necessarily highlight, and that point that plays alongside PTSD is what we call moral injury. Moral injury is the damage done to one's conscious and moral compass when that person perpetuates or witnesses or fails to prevent an act that transgresses one's own moral belief, value, or ethical code of conduct. It's important here to understand that it is damage to one's moral belief, the value or code of ethical conduct. This is not some type of simply religious issue, although it can be part of someone's religion. It simply includes the value someone holds to be as truth that's taught to them from a young age. Maybe it's a family saying or a local colloquialism. Things like, if you want respect, you have to show respect. Your word is your bond. You reap what you sow. You shouldn't harm others. These aren't necessarily religious sayings, but they hold the same value. And when those are violated, they create moral injury. They create a dilemma that can cause great distress, leading to a mental psychosis in some. Let me give you an example. Throughout our lives, most people are taught that life is valuable, and it's wrong to take the life of another. As a matter of fact, we as a society say that life is so valuable that if you kill someone, you're going to go to jail. In some states, you're actually going to be executed yourself. Now, when some individuals join the military, they're handed a gun and they're taught hand-to-hand combat with skills to kill another, and then they're sent out with instructions to kill. As an order, the idea doesn't seem so bad. However, when that individual pulls the trigger or takes another's life by their bare hand, the conflict sets in as the individual tries to process his or her actions with what that person has always held to be true, which is you should not kill. And you should always value life of the other. The military member will try to rationalize that they were simply following an order, but in the middle of the night, the nagging of the mind happens. There becomes a war within the individual that often becomes the war within the war. And even when one is not involved in the battle, I'm thankful it's not them, it's someone else, a more dilemma ensues. And what that individual thought he or she held as absolute is now shifted. The result is this: it's a feeling that one cannot trust themselves or anyone else. Their line of true reality is shifted, and they're left with doubt and fear about everything that they held to be true comes into question. Their belief in a higher power, in God, their belief in the values taught by parents and teachers and aunts and uncles and others throughout society, even how they should feel begins to shift for them, and they feel like that they're sinking in some kind of quicksand, if you will. The moral injury brings about this insecurity about all of life. The question that often comes is, if I always held this to be true and it isn't, then what else is a lie? So as you can see, it builds great distrust in the person, within the person themselves as well as others. I want to invite you to watch this short clip from the Volunteers of America. James is a Vietnam vet who explains moral injury in his terms.
Anger, depression. I was defective. Part of me was fragmented and fractured. I was ashamed. When I came back from that war experience, what I lived with most of the time was a profound sadness, and that feeling of powerlessness and helplessness is a large contributor to moral injury. I always said that I knew I would come home in one piece. I did, and I didn't. I recall very vividly, almost every night, in the mountains, there was firefighting going on. We were thankful that it wasn't us, and that is a dilemma as well. Am I my brother's keeper?
You feel like you're such a damaged person that you are no longer worthy of love, that you are inherently stained.
I was able to pretend that nothing bothered me, that it didn't affect me.
You heard James use many words that we associate with PTSD, words like anger, depression, defective, fragmented, fractured, shamed, profound sadness, and powerlessness and helplessness. He went on to talk about his internal battle as he was thankful he wasn't the one that was being shot at or called into battle. In addition to what society or our family has taught a military member, there is a code of conduct that each branch of the military has, and we're called to memorize those and to live by those. And all of them have some sort of wording that says, I will stand and fight the enemy. I will not leave a comrade behind. I will defend to the death. All of which sound way easy when you're standing in formation. However, when bullets start flying, it becomes a reality check. We in the military say it's gut check time. Otherwise, who's going to stand up and be the first to defend until death? Which is all well and good until you see that first impact of the bullet hit human flesh, as everything goes in slow motion, and you see it in intricate detail, which is done because of the adrenaline rush. Maybe it's the first time that you're able to justify your actions of my life over theirs. However, it gets harder and harder, especially if you're also called to work in close contact with the citizens of the area in which you're at war with, which is done more and more in today's wars as we seek to build goodwill. Additionally, the longer the war goes on, the more one questions its purpose while still being the warrior, which again further solidifies this alienation one feels from the core belief in their action. So the war rages inside. And to complicate this, we bring the warrior back home and we call them a hero. We tell them not to kill again, for life is valuable. Then in 4 years or so, we send them back out with a gun in order to kill. At best, we give them what I call moral whiplash. I would argue that one doesn't have PTSD without moral injury. Then the next reasonable question would be, do all individuals who experience moral injury get PTSD? And if not, why? The answer is no. And just like we said when we talked just earlier about PTSD and who it affects, we don't know why some get PTSD and others do not. But most everyone with PTSD will have another disorder, or not a disorder, but will have another experience called post-traumatic stress. And I want to talk about that for just a moment. So what is post-traumatic stress and how is it different from PTSD? Post-traumatic stress is a common and normal and often an adaptive response to an experience or a tragic or traumatic or stressful event. And you'll see this for some in the military that does include combat. Almost everyone who experiences a scary situation will show at least a few signs of post-traumatic stress. That's because our brains are hardwired to tell our bodies to tense our muscles, to breathe faster, to pump more blood when it's under stress. This is the fight or flight response that prepares your body to deal with the threat or challenge in the environment by pumping more blood or oxygen to your muscles. This fight or flight response is a normal reflex during and sometimes even after a traumatic event, which is why PTS is considered a normal reaction and not a mental illness. One of the experiences of post-traumatic stress is your heart may race, hands will shake, you may sweat or feel afraid or nervous. And after the stressful event, you might even avoid or be leery of engaging in an activity again. You may have a bad dream about the event that you just experienced. You may feel nervous in a situation that reminds you of, or reminds them of an unpleasant event. Although they can be momentarily intense, symptoms of post-traumatic stress usually subsides in a few days after the event and won't cause any prolonged, meaningful interference with one's life. The key identifiers between post-traumatic stress, some of the key identifiers are the length of time, the intensity of the individual stress and mental anxiety. As a general rule, now this is not 100% accurate, but it's a pretty good general rule. If an individual has a stress or physical reaction that lasts less than 6 months, then it's probably PTS. If it's longer than that, it could very possibly be PTSD. However, I will say that I've known military members that can mask the PTSD and it looked like PTS for 18 to 24 months. The issue of diagnosis that arises that family members and those close to the veteran are undereducated. So unless some major event happens, not being able to get along with people at work, drinking too much, disappearing for long periods of time, major marital discord, suicide attempt, extreme mood swings, or other such events, the individual can go undiagnosed for years. The family member or the person close to the individual, only them and the veteran just know that there's been a change that's happened within the life of the veteran, and the veteran only understands that she or he doesn't feel right. And one of the greatest problems in dealing with PTSD patients is first to get them to recognize that they have PTSD. Just as Skylar said, I didn't know I had it. It took many people to tell me about it. And so a lot of folks are just uneducated when it comes to PTSD and how it can be treated. And so they ignore the symptoms because they don't want to be viewed as broken. And so often what they'll do is they'll begin to self-medicate. Some of the ways one self-medicates is by drinking or using drugs, and they can be illegal drugs as well as prescribed legal drugs. You'll see them in doctor's offices that ERs with unexplained pain and multiple times seeking narcotics, and they don't often get the narcotics with the new laws that have been put into place, but they go and try. Their pain, though, I will tell you, it's real. However, it may be mental pain that's presented itself physically. When trying to deal with PTSD, one may isolate themselves from others. PTSD may present itself as being distant and detached, and so you think that they might have an attachment disorder. There are members of the military, when they go into war, when they're deployed, they purposefully and willfully develop this detachment persona so that they don't have to feel the pain of being away from their family. And they don't want to have to feel the guilt or remorse when they lose a comrade in arms, and so they'll emotionally numb themselves, and so that's part of what goes on with someone dealing with PTSD in that capacity. I want to talk for a few moments how you see PTSD expressed in the medical care environment and how you might navigate that. What you'll know that you'll see with veterans, they'll want to assert control and feel more in control. And the more that they feel that control is being taken away, the more they're going to fight and push for that control. And as a chaplain, I've experienced this not only when the veteran is the patient, but I've also experienced it when the veteran is the primary caregiver. They may interfere with treatment decisions because they want to control the outcome. They will deny suggested treatment, especially at the end of life, because they believe that they can adapt and overcome the objective that's in front of them. They may try to force feed a patient, believing if they force feed the patient and have enough will and get the patient to follow their command, that they'll be able to overcome whatever the diagnosis is. They'll push to keep on going with treatment, even when medical staff tells them that there's no benefit. It has been ingrained into the military member that there's no obstacle too great to overcome if you have the right mindset, willingness. And so often that's kind of how they're coming at us in the medical community with. So, so how do we address the veteran that's in this state? Most veterans were used to being given an order and following that given order and having it followed. An order is direct. There's no gray area. So what I would tell you is be direct with a veteran. Don't let there be a lot of gray area. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be compassionate. You still need to be compassionate. But lay out the battle plan, if you will, for the veteran. Tell the veteran where they are. Give them the options. Tell them what course of action is best and why. And they're going to have questions, so take the time to answer those questions with the objectives in mind. Be compassionate and empathetic, but don't come across as undecisive or scared. Military members will respond to strength over weakness. Again, let me reiterate that compassion doesn't equal weakness as long as you're confident and direct. Another helpful tool is to help the veteran feel empowered. Ask them to tell you in their own words the course of treatment or what the objective is. It's commonplace for a veteran, especially a war veteran, that they're given a mission and they repeat that mission back in their own words so that they can prove that they know what the objective is. This empowers the veteran with knowledge and a feeling that they have contributed to the process, and that's vital. Sometimes PTSD presents itself in a person as an adventure seeker, and these folks present themselves as full open throttle type folks. They're going to take unnecessary risks because they'll be the ones that when they're given an idea, they're all in, and they appear to always be amped up, which they are. People confuse them as adrenaline junkies or say things like they're always on the go. Their motors on high idle. These individuals come across as high alert. They are in a type of fight or flight mode almost all the time. You heard Skylar talk about the hypervigilance. That is these folks. You heard one member in the video talk about shaking inside. The person was looking for a way to deal with the pain, and they often deal with this pain by doing. And so I think it's important to understand that. And so as long as this person is doing, they feel like that they can potentially outrun their pain. That's one of the ways they avoid dealing with what's going on. And they'll find it very hard to sit still. You'll see them fidgeting, pacing, looking for ways to get out. They'll almost be like an animal that's in a cage. And so when you deal with this person, it's okay to give them a task. But let me tell you, when you give them a task, you need to ensure that it's a very clear and very direct of what you want them to do, because if you don't, they'll go off on their own and do all kinds of things that could be destructive. So make sure that you're very clear and with exactly what you're wanting to do, and they're doing something that is going to empower them, because it's just hard for them to sit. Let me talk about addressing veterans when you see them in maybe a hospital environment, in a clinical environment. When you enter a veteran's room, it's always important to announce that you're entering by knocking on the door and announcing who you are. We don't know what veterans have PTSD and what ones don't. We don't know what they've been through. And so just by firmly knocking on the door, now I'm not talking about banging, I'm talking about knocking so that they can hear you, and announcing who you are keeps them from being startled. And I would also say, don't walk in a room with the lights off and abruptly turn it on. Or if the light's on, don't just go in and turn it off. Also, that goes the same thing for opening and closing curtains. It's important that you ask the veteran if it's okay for you to turn on a light or turn off the light or open curtains or shut the curtains. This keeps the veteran more at peace as they feel empowered as well. Also ask the veteran whether or not she wants a light left on or off when you leave, because sometimes darkness is a trigger and produces fear and anxiety. And so, and if they want it on or off, it'd be helpful to put that in their notes so that the rest of the staff are aware of the veteran's preference. Also, I would say avoid slamming doors when leaving a room, not only the veteran's room, but the ones adjacent. Don't pop plastic bags or bubbles around them. When last time I was downrange, I wasn't thinking about it, and I had a package that came and it was packed in these little plastic bubbles, and I was in my office. I knew I needed to get the air out of the bubble wrap, so what did I do? I just grabbed it and started popping them, and I walked out of my office, and there were 4 or 5 people on the ground with their head covered, and I thought, oops, bad mistake, don't do that again. So don't do that when you're around veterans. Also, books falling off or binders falling off a desk or whatever, anything that makes a big loud noise will startle a veteran that has PTSD, so be aware of that. The other thing people don't often think about is chewing gum and popping bubbles. That's a big trigger. So I would just say as staff, don't chew gum around veterans. I understand the popping of the bubbles, but sometimes just the chewing of the gum causes a veteran to be a little bit on edge as well. I want to end this segment by giving you some of the statistics from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and National Centers on PTSD. 11 out of 20 100 veterans, between 11 and 20%, who served in Iraqi Freedom or Operation Enduring Freedom have PTSD in a given year. 12 out of every 100 Gulf War veterans, that's 12%, have PTSD in a given year. About 15 out of every 100 Vietnam veterans, that's 15%, were currently diagnosed with PTSD. And it's estimated that 30 out of every 100, or 30% of Vietnam veterans, have had PTSD in their lifetime. About 23 out of every 100 women, that's 23%, have reported sexual assault in the military. 55 out of 100 women, 55%, and 38 out of 100, 38% of men have experienced sexual harassment while in the military. Now let's put all this in perspective. There are approximately 9,087,000 individuals who served in Vietnam, and there are 774,000 still alive today, which means there's the possibility of 116,100 individuals that have PTSD just from war. 650,000 served in the Gulf War, and nearly 300,000 veterans are serving with war-related illnesses, to include an estimated 78,000 with PTSD. 1.9 million have served in OEF and OIF, which means there are an estimated 285,000 individuals with PTSD just from that war. To present, from the Vietnam War to now, there are an estimated 479,100 American veterans serving with PTSD. Some that have been diagnosed and many that haven't. There are just those that, and these are just those that have been in combat. It doesn't include sexual assault or harassment. Also, these numbers don't include first responders in the civilian sector. These are just military personnel with the PTSD disorder. Now I'm going to change our focus to suicide ideation and prevention. I want us to begin by watching this video from PsyCup Education. It's really well done, and I felt they did a better job than I could do. So it'll last about 4 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it a little further, and then we'll address some questions that you'll have over the whole webinar. So I invite you to watch this video.
Everyone would be better off without me.
I couldn't see any other way out.
I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up.
I wanted all of this to go away.
These are the voices of suicidal ideation, which is the thinking that haunts people and brings them to the brink of taking their own lives. Most of us have been touched by suicide in some way. Some of us have personally lost a loved one to suicide, or we know someone who has. Some of us have had suicidal thoughts ourselves or even attempted suicide. Far too many people take their own lives every year in America, with especially concerning rates in veterans and adolescents. We know there are certain situations that add to the risk of people attempting suicide. If they have made an attempt in the past, if a member of their family has attempted or died from suicide, if they own or have easy access to weapons, a lot of unused medication or drugs, or anything else that could be used to attempt suicide. If any of these are true, their risk can increase further if they struggle with mental health problems, depressed mood and hopelessness, or serious risk factors. Other problems like a recent breakup, job loss, or legal trouble can be important to consider. Or if they use drugs or drink alcohol. Both are highly related to death by suicide. And if someone uses much more during difficult times, it's important to notice this. We are completely certain of two things. Suicidal ideation is an emergency, and we can all play an important part of saving someone who might be living it. Here are a few critical things to understand. Most of the time, people don't want to die. Even when things feel very bad, most people truly want to live. People say they just don't want to feel the pain anymore. That's why it's so important for you to know what to look for. So how can you tell if someone in your life needs help, and what should you do? First, really listen. This is often the most important thing to do when someone we know is struggling. If a person is thinking of suicide, he or she says so. Sometimes the person literally comes out and says something like, "I wish I were dead." Other people may mention suicidal thoughts more passively, saying something like, "If I were gone, no one would notice," or "I have nothing to live for," or "I just wish all of this would stop." Then, watch. Heavy or increased drug or alcohol use can be a warning sign if someone has been thinking of suicide. Also, pay attention if someone is socially isolated, or if someone tells you he or she is feeling overwhelmed by stressful situations that don't seem to have solutions. We need to notice when our friends and family are having more trouble than they usually do. Finally, ask. If anything does not feel or sound right to you, or if you're worried at all, ask about it. Make it straightforward and don't be afraid. Use these words. Are you thinking of killing yourself? You will not give someone the idea if that person wasn't already considering it. In fact, most of the time, people feel relieved that they can talk about what they're struggling with, and you very well might save their lives. If you think someone is in danger of suicide, stay with them and get help. If your friend or loved one admits to thinking about suicide, make sure the situation is safe and stay with the person. Validate his or her feelings and listen without judgment, even if it's scary. Encourage the person to get professional help right away, and help if necessary, even if this means calling 911 or going to the hospital. Every one of us has a role to play in preventing suicide. If you are feeling like suicide might be an option for you, please be brave and ask for help. If you're worried about someone you care about, be the one who asks the all-important question. You could very well save that person's life.
The suicide rate among veterans is 1.5 times greater in males and 2.5 times greater in females than it is in the general population. These suicide rates increase in veterans as they get older and are higher in those 55 years plus. There are 22 veterans suicides a day. That's 8,030 veterans who commit suicide each year, which is almost 8 times the number killed in 9/11. I want to just give you some statistics because I want to rush through this so we can have time for question and answers. Between 2005 and 2017, there were 78,875 veterans who committed suicide. In 2018, 41.7% of the service members who killed themselves had never deployed to a con. In the military survey, 2/3 of the respondents said that they knew of someone who had tried to commit suicide. 62% say they had lost a fellow young veteran to suicide. This video gave us some signs to look for: anger, rage, mood swings, episodes of anxiety and agitation, increased alcohol or drug substance abuse, self-destructive and risky behaviors. There's some reasons that people, veterans are at higher risk, and that's transitioning back into civilian culture. Maybe they had a disability, they were discharged involuntarily, they have relationship issues. Many of them joined the military because they had fractured families and now they have a lack of family support. They lose their purpose, and then there's also financial insecurity. I want to give you some signs to look for, some key phrases to hear from a veteran to know if they're thinking about suicide. When you hear a person say, "All I need is one bullet, it'll take me one bullet and I'll have no worries," that means they're going to kill themselves. So you need to take action immediately. This is one that I didn't know until I had a friend that I worked with, that I was raised with. His wife called me for help, and what he kept saying is, "I'm going to go to Camp O'Donnell." Camp O'Donnell was a camp in the Philippines where the Bataan March took place. And so if you hear someone make that statement, what they're saying is, "I'm going to go kill myself." And if you hear someone say, "I'm going to take a vacation by myself to the Philippines," that means the same thing. Or you hear them say, "I'm going to punch my ticket." Those are key phrases that you really need to look for. The rate has gone from 20.2 deaths per thousand in 2015 to 29.5 deaths per thousand in 2019. And with COVID this year, the number seems to be increasing. I know it is here in the state of Arkansas. So these numbers, again, only represent suicides. They don't represent actual attempts. I want to dispel some myths. People say don't ask because you'll give them the idea. Generally, if you ask, it lets them know that someone actually cares, and so that will potentially stop them from doing that. If the myth is if someone's died, they'll find a way. That's not always the case. They've just depleted their mental resources, and by your intervention, you can stop that. People say most suicides happen within the holiday months or the winter. That's not actually true. The highest time of suicide is in the spring. And the other myth is once someone hits rock bottom, they're recovered and you no longer have to watch them because they're not at risk. I'll tell you that that's absolutely false. You need to keep an eye on them until they do get to a healthy place. And finally, people say there's no sign of people who commit suicide. Let me tell you this from the medical profession. 38% of suicide victims made some type of healthcare visit the week before they attempted. 64% visit a healthcare facility within the month of the attempt. And 95% visit a healthcare facility within the year of the attempt. The percentage of visits with mental health or substance abuse diagnosis was about 25% within a week that visited a doctor, 44% within a month, and 73% within the year. So I've dealt with suicide throughout my career, and we don't have time for me to go into that. But most of the time, the intervention really does help. I want to give you just a quick acronym to remember. It's called ACE. Ask. If you think someone is potentially suicide, just ask them. Say, is everything all right? Are you thinking about committing suicide? They know then that someone has noticed, and that helps relieve. The C stands for care. Care for them. Listen to their story. Repeat the story back to them if you must. Let them know you care. And then finally, if they want to enter a contract not to hurt themselves or someone else, escort them to a place where they can be safe. Don't leave them all alone by themselves. So I want to leave it there at this point and give you an opportunity